Raf el-Arsini did not drink, Raf el-Arsini did not lose his composure, and Raf el-Arsini certainly never descended to the servants' quarters in the East Wing at 2 in the morning to knock on a maid's door. In the 2 years Marin Doyle had worked in this house, she had never seen a single crack in him, not a crooked tie, not a raised voice, not an answer that came a second too late. People called him the chairman of a Chicago shipping company. Marin called him the man with 4 phones who never slept. Every single morning, a dozen men crowded outside his study, waiting for him to tell them what to do. She was 27. She cleaned this house to support her 12-year-old brother, and she had lasted 2 years by following only one rule: don't ask. Don't ask why meetings happened at 4 in the morning. Don't ask why the last room in the basement corridor was always locked. Don't ask why the housekeeper's salary here was double what it was anywhere else in the city. But on that rainy night, when the pounding at her door tore her from sleep and she peered through the crack, the man in the corridor was no longer her employer. His coat was soaked through, his hair disheveled. He leaned against the doorframe as if it alone was keeping him upright, and when he finally spoke there was no order, no explanation, no apology. He said only 4 words: "I can't do it anymore." Marin asked him what exactly he couldn't do anymore, and the answer that came from the mouth of the most powerful man she had ever met shattered everything she thought she understood about the last 2 years of her life. Marin didn't stop to think. She grabbed his sleeve and pulled hard, dragging him inside, then closed the door as quietly as she could, so quietly she heard the lock click shut. There were 7 rooms in the servants' block, and 6 other people slept behind doors less than 10 steps away. She led him down the narrow corridor to the auxiliary kitchen at the far end of the East Wing, the only place in the house no one entered after midnight, and switched on the small lamp above the sink. Raf el-Arsini stood in the middle of that kitchen, the man whose name made all of Chicago drop its voice to a whisper. Water still dripped from his hair onto the tile floor, and he looked around as if seeing this room for the first time in his life. "Please sit down, sir," Marin said. He didn't sit. He braced his hand on the edge of the table, and when he spoke his voice no longer had that precise, measured rhythm she'd heard for the past 2 years. "Who asked me what I can't bear anymore?" Marin didn't answer. She stood an arm's length away, still holding the edges of her nightgown with both hands, and waited. "Being this person," he said. "This whole city needs me to be this person. This whole house needs me to be this person. Every morning 12 men stand at my study door. They're there from 7, waiting for me to tell them what to do. Not one of them asks if I slept. Not one of them asks if I even want to do any of this. They just wait." He fell silent, and the hand gripping the table tightened. "Only you in 2 years. You never asked me for anything. Not a raise, not a day off, not for me to step in and fix something for you. You're the only person in this house who doesn't need me." Then he lifted his head, and the look in his eyes made Marin want to step back. "Let me stay here just one night. I need you." The kitchen fell into a silence so long that Marin could hear the water dripping from the faucet, and in that silence her heart didn't waver even the slightest. Her mind went straight to calculation, cold and orderly, the same calculations she'd practiced for 7 years until they came more naturally than breathing. If anyone found out what happened tonight, she would lose her job. Losing her job meant losing her insurance. Losing her insurance meant Mika would be dropped from the treatment program, and she'd have to go back on the waiting list she'd spent 11 months getting off. She was 27, and the most powerful man she knew had just said he needed her, while she was trying to figure out where the money for next month would come from. She couldn't afford to feel joy, she could only afford to calculate. "How much have you had to drink, sir?" she asked. He let out a laugh, a tired sound with no joy in it. "Enough to say what I haven't said in 2 years. Then tomorrow you'll regret it." "I won't regret it." "Yes, you will," Marin said, and for the first time in 2 years it wasn't the voice of an employee. "Tomorrow morning you'll wake up, remember what you said and who you said it to, and it will burn. Then you won't be able to look me in the eye anymore. And one morning you'll call me upstairs, say a few very kind words, and I'll have to find another job." Raphael looked at her for a long time. "You think too far ahead." "I have to," she answered. "There's no one else to think ahead for me." She poured him a glass of water, and he took it but didn't drink. She reached out to steady him by the elbow, and for the first time in 2 years, touching this man, she understood that he was heavier than she'd imagined, and that he was leaning almost all his weight on her arm without even realizing it. She led him to the adjoining reading room, sat him on the sofa against the wall, removed his wet shoes and went for a blanket. By the time she returned, his head had fallen back against the cushion, his eyes were closed, and his breathing had evened out. She covered him with the blanket, set the glass of water on the floor within reach, and was about to stand when he spoke very quietly, his voice slipping between breaths like a man talking in his sleep. 107 nights. Marin froze. She leaned closer, but he said nothing more. 107. She didn't understand what the number meant, and for a fraction of a second she almost asked, but she didn't. She never asked questions. In this house, questions were a luxury people paid for with their jobs, and she had a 12-year-old boy waiting for her with a promise of lemon cookies. On Sunday, she turned off the light in the reading room, closed the door, and stood in the corridor for a while before returning to her room. The rain was still falling. She lay down but didn't sleep. By morning, she would have to decide whether any of it had really happened, or whether it had never happened at all. And the woman who had made no mistakes in 2 years was about to make her first wrong choice. At 6:40 in the morning, Raphael Arsini woke with a stiff neck and a dull ache in his temple. He didn't recognize the ceiling above him. It took him a moment to realize he was lying on the sofa in the reading room on the east wing on the servants' floor, a place he'd visited no more than 3 times in 8 years of owning this house. Then the memories returned, not in a single stream but in scattered pieces, each one hitting harder than the last. The rain. The door. The face of a young woman looking at him through a narrow gap with the alarm of someone who had decided trouble had arrived. The auxiliary kitchen under one small lamp. And his own voice, sounding utterly foreign, saying what he hadn't said to anyone in 8 years. Raphael sat up abruptly, a mistake, and his head answered with a fierce throb. He covered his face with his hand. Then he saw the small table beside the sofa. On it sat a coffee pot still steaming, 2 pills neatly placed next to a full glass of water, his shoes dried and perfectly aligned under the table, and a folded piece of paper. He picked up the note with fingers that didn't fully obey him. The handwriting was small and even, written quickly but not carelessly. I cleaned the wine from the floor. No one knows you came down here. If you want me to leave, please give me 2 weeks. M. Raphael read it a second time, then a third. There was no word of reproach in those 3 sentences. There was also no word of hope. No, are you all right? No, what did you mean by what you said? Not the slightest indication that she had heard his words and taken them to heart. She simply reported that the work was done, then asked in advance to be notified of her dismissal. She had cleaned up that night as thoroughly as she would have cleaned a wine stain from a tile floor, thoroughly, carefully, leaving no trace, and now she was waiting for him to decide whether to eliminate her as well. Raphael sat with the note in his hand for a long time. He thought about how for 2 years he'd paid this woman double the usual rate, and she had never once asked why. He thought about how last night he'd told her she was the only person in the house who didn't need him, and now on this scrap of paper she had proved it with a precision that felt almost cruel. She didn't need him, she only needed the job. The reading room door opened without a knock. Sabina Arsini stood on the threshold. Phone in one hand, remaining there long enough to absorb everything in the room. Her brother, 34-year-old chairman of Arsini Freight, was sitting on a sofa in the servants' quarters in rumpled clothes. His shirt was stale, his tie was gone, and his feet were bare. You didn't come back to your room last night, Sabina said. It wasn't a question. I had business. I called you twice at 4 in the morning. I know, you didn't answer. In 8 years you've never missed one of my calls. Sabina stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Where were you? Raphael didn't answer. He reached for the glass of water and swallowed the 2 pills. Sabina watched him with the attention of someone who had lived beside her brother long enough to read even what he didn't say aloud. She looked at the coffee pot, still hot, and understood that someone had brewed coffee less than half an hour ago. She glanced at his shoes, cleaned and neatly aligned. She looked at the sheet of paper in her brother's hand and didn't ask what it was. Are you going to tell me? No. Did something happen? Nothing happened. And then Sabina noticed something that made her breath catch. Her brother was smiling. It wasn't the polite smile he wore at meetings, and it wasn't the tired smirk she was used to. It was a tiny smile, barely visible, hiding in the corners of his mouth. And in his eyes, such a smile Sabina hadn't seen on his face since the winter of 2018. She stood there for a few more seconds, then decided to ask nothing further. The port people will be waiting for you at 9, she said. You should take a shower. I know. Sabina left the room and closed the door behind her. Alone, Raphael looked at the note again. He could have thrown it away. He could have let her resign, work out her 2 weeks, pay her 3 extra months' salary, and after that they could both live as if that rainy night had never happened. That would have been reasonable. That was exactly what a man in his position should have done. Raphael folded the note into 4 and put it in his breast pocket. And for the first time in 8 years, Raphael Arsini made a decision without remembering to tap his signet ring twice. Every Sunday Marin came to Mika, and for 7 years she hadn't missed a single time. She took the bus at 10 in the morning, transferred once, then walked 4 blocks with a canvas bag over her shoulder. Mika was already waiting for her at the table by the window. The chessboard was set up, and the first thing the boy said when he saw his sister wasn't a greeting. "You're 4 minutes late. The bus, you always blame the bus. It really was the bus. Sit down, I'm playing white." The first game lasted 18 moves. Mika was 12, thin as a rail with hair sticking out in all directions from lying on it, and he played chess with the solemn air of an old man discussing a business deal. On the 14th move he took Marin's queen, then leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and watched her struggle for 4 more moves before she finally conceded. "You brought your queen out too early," he said. "You always bring your queen out too early, you don't have patience." "Have patience? You don't have patience for anything." In the second game Marin tried to play more slowly and lost on the 23rd move. In the third she lost even faster than the first 2 combined, and Mika had to make a serious effort to keep a straight face. "3 out of 3, he said. "I think you should find another game." "I let you win." "No, you didn't, you really lost. You lost 3 times in a row and now you're lying." Marin laughed, the first real laugh in 3 days. Mika studied her for a few seconds, then nodded at the low bun at the back of her head. "Old lady hairstyle again. It's a neat hairstyle. It's an old lady hairstyle. You're 27 and you do your hair like Mrs. Kowalski from the next room, and she's 81. Mrs. Kowalski is a respectable woman. She's 81, Marin." He shook his head with mock disappointment and began setting up the pieces again. "1 more. I've already lost 3. Then lose a 4th. The 4th game was interrupted on the 9th move when they started arguing. Marin castled. Mika objected. Marin said she could. Mika declared that the rook had already moved, so castling was no longer possible. Marin insisted the rook hadn't moved at all, and Mika pulled out the chess rulebook with worn corners and opened it right to the page he'd marked in advance. It turned out the boy was right. "You marked that page last week," Marin said. "Yes, you knew I would castle wrong." "I knew you always castle wrong." At that moment a doctor glanced in, looked at the chart hanging at the head of the bed, nodded to Marin, said everything was going well, and moved on to the next room. Mika waited until the doctor was out of sight, then returned to far more important matters. "Next Sunday bring lemon cookies. We'll see." "No, we'll see. Promise, Marin, pinky swear." He extended his pinky across the chessboard and held it perfectly still until Marin sighed, hooked her pinky around his and shook 3 times. "I promise lemon cookies. With grated lemon zest on top, not the other kind." "I know which kind you mean, I'm just reminding you." At 4 in the afternoon Marin stood to leave. Mika never said goodbye. He only said until next Sunday, as if it wasn't a possibility but an inevitability, and Marin was always grateful for that. On the bus home, she sat by the window and did what she did every Sunday on this same route. She counted. 7 years ago she had dropped out of medical school in her 2nd year, and for all 7 years she had been earning back every credit one by one at the community college, taking evening and weekend classes, 1 or 2 courses a semester, paying out of pocket, taking no loans, and never asking anyone for help. She had enough credits. She had passed all the theoretical subjects. The only thing she lacked was 12 weeks of clinical practice at a hospital, and she had reviewed the list of institutions in the city that accepted students so many times she'd memorized it. All of them required day shifts, from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, for 12 weeks straight. And from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, Marin Doyle was at the Arsini mansion. She considered quitting her job for 12 weeks and then asking to come back, but she dismissed the thought the same evening it occurred to her, because 12 weeks without pay meant 12 weeks without insurance. She thought about asking for a night shift, but there were no night shifts for household staff in that house. For 7 years, money had never been her problem. She'd earned it. She'd earned every dollar slowly and steadily, and she was so close. The only thing standing between her and a completely different life was time, and time was the only thing in the world you couldn't earn by taking on more work. The bus stopped at the corner of her street at 10 to 6. The following evening, a man from that house would offer her exactly what she was missing, and that was when everything began to turn dangerous. At 6 in the evening on Monday, Freddie Cowatch came to the kitchen and told Marin that the master wanted to see her in the library. She said it in the same calm voice she used to announce dinner, but she didn't look Marin straight in the eye. And Marin understood that the woman who had been in this house for 31 years knew far more than she was willing to say. Marin took off her apron, hung it on its hook, then changed her mind and put it back on. She went up to the library in her apron. Raphael stood by the window when she entered, and he was himself again. His white shirt had not a single crease. His tie was perfectly knotted. His hair was neatly combed. Everything was calibrated to the millimeter, just as she'd seen every morning for the past 2 years. Only his eyes were different. These eyes had looked at her last night in the kitchen, and they still remembered it. "Sit down," he said. "I can stand, sir." "Sit down, Marin." She sat in the chair across from his desk, her back straight, her hands on her knees. "I won't bring up what happened last night again," Raphael said. "If you want to believe it never happened, then it never happened. I called you here for something else." "Yes, sir." "I want to offer you the position of head housekeeper." Marin said nothing. "You'll oversee all the household staff, manage schedules, purchasing, and oversight. You won't have to clean anymore, and most importantly, the schedule. This position doesn't require your presence here at set hours. You can organize your work however you see fit as long as everything functions as it should." He paused. "Which means you can be free from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, for 12 weeks. A long silence settled in the library. Marin sat perfectly still. "You know about my clinical practice," she said. "I know. It doesn't matter how I know. It matters to me." Raphael said nothing. He only slid a sheet of paper toward her, a printed list of 4 hospitals in the city that accepted nursing students for spring clinical rotations. Marin had known all those names by heart for years. "You can choose any of them," he said. "I won't interfere with your admission process. You'll apply yourself, interview yourself, and work yourself. I'm only freeing up space in your schedule, nothing more." He said nothing about money. No tuition payment, no fees, no envelopes, no offers that would make her feel like she was accepting charity. Marin understood that he had thought it all through carefully, and it was this foresight that frightened her most. She looked at the paper on the desk for a long time, then slid it back toward him. "I won't accept this." Raphael looked up at her. "Why?" "Because you're offering it to me today," she said slowly, weighing each word, not taking her eyes off him. "If you'd offered this 6 months ago, I'd have fallen to my knees and thanked you. But you're offering it today after what happened last night. And the moment I accept, I stop being just a worker in this house. I become someone who owes you. Every time you look at me, you'll remember what you gave me. Every time I look at you, I'll remember what I owe you. And one day when I want to refuse you something, I won't be able to." She stood. "I wash your floors. Don't make me into someone you pity." Raphael didn't stop her. He only asked one question, and it made her freeze in the middle of the room. "Why did you drop out of school?" Marin stood with her back to him. "You knew I dropped out. You know about the clinical practice. I'm sure you've already found out the reason." "I know the dates. I don't know the reason." She turned around. "Because there was a 5-year-old boy who needed someone to sign papers. No one else could sign them." Raphael Arsini was silent for a long time after her words. He sat down and looked not at her but at the surface of the desk before him. Then he opened the lower left drawer, took something out and placed it on the table. It was a stethoscope, old, with rubber tubing yellowed by time and metal tarnished from years without polish. "I was in my 2nd year of medical school," he said. "They called me right in the middle of a lecture. I never went back to that classroom." Marin stared at the stethoscope lying on the dark wood. In 2 years she'd cleaned this study over 200 times, but she'd never known what lay in that drawer. "When was that?" she asked. "Winter of 2018. Marin froze. A second, no more than that, a pause so brief she wasn't even sure she'd let him notice it. Winter of 2018 was the winter her father died. She said nothing, asked no more questions, only gave a barely perceptible nod, thanked him for the offer and asked permission to go back downstairs. Raphael didn't take back the sheet of paper. He left it where it lay on the desk. That night at 2 in the morning, Marin went down to the kitchen and found the light already on. Raphael Arsini was sitting at the kitchen table, shirt collar unbuttoned, no tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows. In front of him stood only a glass of water and nothing else. He didn't stand, didn't explain why he was there, didn't mention what had happened in the library that afternoon, and didn't ask if his presence bothered her. He simply reached out and pulled back the chair opposite him. "Read." "I'll sit here." Marin remained in the doorway for a few more seconds. Then she walked in, set down her stack of books, pulled back the chair and sat. She opened the top book to the page marked with a paper clip, pulled a pencil from her pocket and began to read. 40 minutes passed, and the man sitting across from her didn't say a word. He didn't look at his phone, didn't stand and pace, didn't ask what she was studying or how much she had left, and didn't try to make conversation. He just sat, both hands on the table. And every time Marin looked up, she saw him staring into the darkness beyond the window with the expression of someone who had finally found a place where no one needed anything from him. She thought she wouldn't be able to concentrate. She thought his presence would make her read the same line 3 times without understanding a word. But after about 15 minutes she forgot he was even there. And that was the strangest thing about the whole night. Close to 3 in the morning, Marin put down her pencil and looked up. Raphael was watching her. "Why don't you go to sleep?" she asked. "Because this is the only place in the house where no one waits for me to speak." She wanted to say something in response, but she didn't. Raphael stood and walked around the table, moving slowly enough that she had plenty of time to stand and leave if she wanted. She didn't stand. He leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was short and warm, with not a trace of hurry. When he pulled back, neither of them said a word. Then the phone rang. It wasn't the phone he always carried in his breast pocket. It was a smaller, older one which he pulled from his left trouser pocket, one Marin had never seen in 2 years. Raphael glanced at the screen, then stepped 3 paces away from the table. For the next 40 seconds, Marin heard the voice of the man who had just kissed her drop 3 registers. "Speaking," pause, "Warehouse 7, another pause, "No, that shipment doesn't stay there until tomorrow evening." His voice didn't rise. That was what was frightening. It just became shorter and drier, stripped of everything that could be called human. And every sentence he spoke was not up for discussion. "Who's on the night shift?" Silence. "Then replace them." Silence. "Handle it by morning, I don't want to hear about it again." While listening, he tapped his thumb twice against his signet ring, 2 very quiet, even taps, exactly 1 beat apart. And Marin realized she'd seen this gesture hundreds of times over the past 2 years, never truly noticing it. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his trouser pocket and turned around. He was the man who had just kissed her again. "Sorry," he said. "It's all right, sir." "Work?" "Yes." Marin closed her book, stacked the 3 books neatly, pressed them to her chest and carefully pushed her chair under the table as she did every night. "It's late. Good night, sir." "Marin," she stopped at the door. "Will you come here tomorrow?" "I don't know," she answered. Then she stepped into the corridor, climbed the back stairs, opened the door to her room and closed it behind her. She set the stack of books on the table, took off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the light. The next morning, for the first time in 2 years, Marin Doyle went looking for Freddie Cowatch to ask a question. At 6 in the morning, Freddie Cowatch was alone in the main kitchen. She was chopping onions on a wooden board, her movements confident and rhythmic, the steady pace of someone who had been doing this work for 31 years. She didn't look up when she heard Marin enter. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep." Marin stood at the edge of the kitchen island for a while, then asked, "Freddie, what's warehouse number 7? The knife stopped mid-slice. Freddie Cowatch set it down on the board, wiped both hands on her apron and looked at Marin for a long time before speaking. It was the look of someone deciding whether to answer, and by the time she'd made her decision, it was too late to stay silent. "Child," she said, "I've been cooking for this family for 31 years. The fact that you're asking me this means you've already answered it yourself. Your real question isn't who they are. Your real question is why you've spent 2 years choosing not to notice." Marin couldn't answer. Freddie pulled a chair away from the island, sat down, and told Marin to sit too. Then she began to speak. She spoke without lowering her voice, without glancing at the door to check if anyone was listening, and without adding a single word to make the story sound scarier than it was. She spoke the way someone describes the weather from last winter. She said that Raphael's grandfather had come here in 1963 and started with 3 trucks delivering blocks of ice to Bridgeport restaurants. She said that by the time the business passed to Raphael's father, the family owned 17 warehouses along the waterfront, and along with those 17 warehouses came other things people didn't write down on paper. She said that in the South Side, there were families who for 3 generations had called the Arsenis simply the Arsenis, and no other words were needed. Everyone understood what that name meant. She said that Raphael's father was shot one December evening on his way home, and Raphael had been in a medical school lecture at the time. He was 26, Freddie said. 3 days after the funeral, more than a dozen men were waiting at the door of his father's study. He walked into that room and never walked out again. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I understand." "No, you don't, not yet." Freddie picked up the knife, then set it down again. "That door at the end of the basement corridor, the one you walk past every day, you've never asked what's inside. Cars pull up to our courtyard at 4 in the morning and you've never once looked out the window. Your salary is double what it is anywhere else in this city and you've never wondered why. Child, you're not blind. You just closed your own eyes, and you did it because you have a 12-year-old boy you need to keep this job for. Marin froze. I don't blame you, Freddie said, her voice softening. I've been doing the same thing for 31 years. I only want you to understand, starting this morning you can't pretend anymore. That's the price of this question. She picked up the knife and went back to chopping onions. The conversation was over. Marin worked that day exactly as she always had. She washed the second-floor corridor, changed towels in 6 bathrooms, walked past that door at the end of the basement twice, and both times looked only straight ahead. At 8 in the evening, she did what she did every Tuesday and Friday for the past 6 months. She went up to the 3rd floor, walked down the west corridor and knocked 3 times on the last door. Come in. Nonna Rosalba was sitting in the armchair by the window, an open Italian book face down on her lap. She was 82, her back still straight, and she looked at Marin with an expression that said she'd been expecting exactly this person. You're 10 minutes late. I'm sorry, I'm not going anywhere anyway. Where are you rushing to? Marin brought out a low stool, set down her bag, washed her hands in the small corner sink and knelt before the old woman. She worked in silence, steady, practiced, without even asking if Nonna was in pain because she knew the old woman would never answer that question honestly. Nonna Rosalba looked down at the top of her head. Your hands are cold. It's cold outside. Cold hands, the old woman repeated, and it didn't sound like a comment, it sounded like a name. I've been calling you that for 6 months and you've never objected. I wouldn't dare object to you. You dare a lot of things, you just can't be bothered to argue. Marin secured the last bandage, packed her supplies and stood. I'll come Friday. The old woman opened her book, but when Marin was at the door, she added one more sentence. Child, everyone in this house knows how to tell others what to do. You're the only one who knows how it's actually done. Marin closed the door and stood in the corridor for a while. She didn't sleep that night. At 7 the next morning she knocked on the study door, and this time she asked the first question herself. She entered without waiting for an answer. She was still in her work uniform, apron tied around her waist. She'd wanted to take it off at the bottom of the stairs but changed her mind, because she wanted the man behind the desk to see clearly who was standing in his study. Raphael looked up. He was already there with an untouched cup of coffee, and before he looked at her face, his eyes went to the apron. Sit down. I have a question for you. I know, you know. I heard Freddie's knife stop in the middle of a motion yesterday morning, Raphael said. In 31 years in this house, she's never let herself stop a knife mid-motion. Marin placed both hands on the back of the chair in front of her and gripped it tightly. What is the Arsini family? You already know. I want to hear it from you. Raphael set his coffee cup down on the table. He didn't dodge the answer, didn't offer carefully prepared explanations, and didn't utter a single sentence that began with but. Yes, he said, that's me. A few seconds of silence filled the room. You're not going to deny it. No, you're not going to say I misunderstood everything. No, you're not going to say you're just the chairman of a shipping company. I am the chairman of a shipping company, Raphael answered. And I am the other thing, both are true. If you want me to say it out loud, I will. I won't make you wonder for another day. And that was when Marin got angry. The anger came later than she'd expected. It hadn't come in the kitchen that morning, hadn't overtaken her while she washed the corridor, hadn't woken her during the sleepless night. It came now, when this man admitted everything with perfect calm, and that calm showed her he had lived with this truth so long it no longer hurt him. 2 years, she said. I lived in this house for 2 years, I ate here, I kept my things here. Every morning I crossed the courtyard at 7, and there were cars I didn't recognize. 2 years, sir, and you never once thought to tell me where I was living. I kept you out of it to protect you. No, Marin shook her head. You kept me out of it because you didn't want me to leave. Raphael said nothing. I'm 27, she said. I have a 12-year-old son and the only signature on all his documents is mine. There's no one else, no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. If I don't come home tomorrow, the only name left in his file will belong to a dead man. Do you understand what that means? It means every time I walk through that door, I need to know exactly where I'm walking into. That's my right. It's the only thing I have, and you took that from me for 2 years. No one will touch you. Raphael said it in the tone of a man stating a fact, not making a promise. Not in this house, not anyone. You don't understand. Marin let go of the chair. I'm not afraid, I'm angry because you made the choice for me. She turned toward the door. Marin, she didn't stop. There's something else about your father. She was already at the door, her hand on the handle, the door half open. She heard the words clearly and she didn't turn around. She went straight down the back stairs, returned to her room and began packing. She had fewer things than she'd thought. At 2 in the afternoon, she handed the estate manager a handwritten resignation letter, effective immediately, and asked not to be paid for the unworked week. Freddie stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her pass, saying nothing, only gripping her wrist firmly and pressing a box of food into her hands. The hardest part came at the end. At 4 in the afternoon, Marin went up to the 3rd floor, walked down the west corridor and knocked 3 times. "Come in." "Goodbye, madam, I've come to say I need to leave for a few days." Nonna Rosalba put down her book. "Why? Family business in Springfield." "For long?" "I'm not sure yet, a few days." The old woman looked at her. She looked for so long that Marin had to lower her eyes to the carpet at her feet. "A few days," the old woman repeated. "Yes, madam, so I won't see you on Friday. Please call the nurse to come, I left the number on the table." "I won't call anyone, Mrs. Orsini." "I won't call anyone," the old woman said. She opened her book and didn't look up again. "Safe travels, cold hands." Marin closed the door very quietly. She stood in the corridor for a while, the only time she cried that entire day. 3 days later, someone knocked on the door of the cramped apartment in Rogers Park. It wasn't Raphael. The person standing at the door was Sabina Orsini. She was in a black coat, holding her car keys in one hand, and she'd brought nothing with her. "May I come in?" The apartment in Rogers Park had one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a dining table pushed against the wall that Marin used as a desk. Sabina sat on one of the 2 chairs and looked around for exactly 3 seconds, no more. Just long enough not to seem arrogant, but not long enough to seem pitying. "Don't worry," she said. "I didn't come to persuade you to come back. My brother doesn't know I'm here, and if he finds out he'll be angry with me for 3 weeks. Then why are you here? To say something and then I'll leave." Marin didn't sit. She leaned against the edge of the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Sabina began to speak the way people speak when they've turned a story over in their minds many times but never said it aloud. "My father was shot one evening in December, less than a mile from our gates, on his way home. I was 21. Raphael was 26. He was sitting in a medical school lecture in his 2nd year. And in the middle of the class, the phone in his pocket vibrated. He stepped into the corridor to answer. I know that because I was the one calling." Sabina paused for a moment. 3 days after the funeral, 17 men came to the house. They didn't come through the front door. They stood in the corridor outside my father's study and waited. They weren't there to offer condolences. They were waiting to see who would open that door. Marin said nothing. "You have to understand what would have happened if no one opened it," Sabina said. "In that world, a family without a head is already dead, even if it hasn't fallen yet. Within a month, those 17 men would have divided everything among themselves. Within 3 months, other families would have come to take their share, and people always start with the weakest point." She looked directly at Marin. "The weakest point was my grandmother, was me. Was my cousin's 2 children, who were 4 and 6 then, women and children in a family no one was left to protect. You understand, this isn't theory. This happened to the Del Vecchio family in 1994, and the whole city knows it." "So he opened the door." "He opened the door," Sabina repeated. "My brother was 26, he was training to be a doctor. He walked into that room and never walked out. 8 years, I've never heard him complain, but I've also never heard him enjoy what he does." Sabina stood. "I didn't come here to convince you he's a good person. He does things I won't tell you about, and you have every right not to want anything to do with that. I just want you to know one thing." She picked up her keys. "My brother has loved only once in his life. If you leave, he'll survive. He'll still wake up at 6, make decisions, carry the weight of this empire every morning. He just won't have a reason to come home anymore." Sabina headed for the door. She opened it, then stopped, still holding the handle. "One more thing. The day you left, he was trying to tell you something. You didn't let him finish." Then she was gone. Marin stood in that small kitchen for a long time after the door had closed. 2 days later, she returned to the mansion. She entered through the service entrance as always, went straight to the study, and this time she wasn't wearing her apron. Raphael stood when she entered, unable to speak. "I have 3 conditions," Marin said. "I'm listening. First, from today on you tell me the truth, all of it. I don't need you to describe every detail of what you do, but if I ask, you answer, honestly." "Agreed." "Second, you don't hide anything from me that concerns me. Nothing. Even if you think it will hurt me, even if you think I'm not ready to hear it, even if you think I'll leave when I find out, you still tell me. Let me decide what I can handle." Raphael was silent a moment longer than necessary. "Agreed. Third, you teach me, your world, how it works, who all these people are, what it all means. I don't want to be in the dark anymore. The one who sees nothing is the easiest target in the room." Raphael Orsini looked at the woman standing before him for a long time. Then he said, "I promise." He had just lied. because inside the safe behind him lay a dossier with the name Doyle that he had kept for 2 years. Raphael fulfilled the third condition before the first two, and he did it in a way no one in the house expected. On Wednesday morning he placed an extra chair in the study in the left corner of his desk and told Marin to sit there. "Stay here all morning," he said. "You don't need to say anything, just listen." The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest 3 weeks in the years she'd lived in this house. First, he taught her to read payroll ledgers, because he said ledgers were the only thing that never lied. He showed her a warehouse listed with 40 employees, though only 27 actually showed up for work, and asked who she thought the other 12 names belonged to. He taught her to look at a transport contract and understand whether it was clean, not by what it said, but by the timing, where goods moved, how long the trip took, why a truck heading north from the river port needed 6 hours to cover a route that should take 40 minutes. He explained why 12 men waited at his door every morning. "It's not because they're loyal to me," he said. "It's because they don't know what to do if someone doesn't tell them. Half of them worked for my father before I was born. They're old. They don't know any other trade. If this house falls, they lose everything. Loyalty and lack of options look very similar from a distance." Marin learned quickly and asked questions he hadn't expected. She asked why one warehouse carried such huge insurance. She asked why 3 different contractors were being paid for the same job in the same quarter. She asked who approved expenses under $5,000. And when he answered that anything under $5,000 didn't require his signature, she said that in that case, she would steal from him in payments of $4,900, one a week for 10 years. Raphael laughed, a real laugh, and wrote the remark down on a scrap of paper. At that moment Sabina walked in. She looked at the chair beside the desk, looked at the two of them, then set down the folder she was carrying with an expression of absolute seriousness. "Sorry to interrupt the lesson, Sabina. No, really, I didn't know we now had a tutor in the house. Do I need to sign up or can I just drop in?" "Get out." "You're laughing," Sabina said. And this time her voice was softer, without mockery. "In the last 3 weeks I've seen you laugh more than in all the previous 8 years combined." Then she left and closed the door behind her. An awkward silence settled in the room, one they both pretended not to notice. On Friday afternoon of the 3rd week, Marin was reviewing the list of Arsini Freight's subsidiaries, 19 names on 2 pages, when her pencil stopped at the 14th line. "What's this? Which one?" "Kesha Meridian Holdings." Raphael glanced at the list. "I don't remember. The other 18 had a name in the next column. This one was blank. It must not have been updated. There were 3 transfers to this account in the last quarter. I'll ask Gideon." He said it and turned the page, and neither of them returned to it. Around 6, as they were gathering papers, Marin suddenly said something that seemed unrelated. "Mr. Prosser's trash can has been empty for the last 3 days." "What? Nothing in it 3 days in a row?" She shrugged. "People only stop throwing things away when they're taking everything home." Raphael laughed. "You really are a housekeeper. It's been 2 years, sir, enough, it's late." And he didn't give it another second's thought. The next Monday morning at exactly 7:15, as he had done every Monday for 12 years, Gideon Prosser knocked and entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was 45, impeccably dressed, and moved with the quiet step of a man accustomed to working in silent rooms. His face wore a pleasant smile that everyone in the house knew well. "Good morning, sir. The coffee is a little stronger today. I changed the blend." Then he saw the chair in the left corner of the desk. He saw the woman sitting there with the list of subsidiaries on her lap and a pencil between her fingers. His smile faltered, half a second, no more, then returned, full and flawless, exactly as before. "Good morning, Miss Doyle." "Good morning, Mr. Prosser." He set the coffee on the desk, reported on 3 matters, received 2 instructions, and left. Down in the basement, Gideon Prosser closed the accounting office door and sat in the dark for a long time. He wasn't afraid of losing his employer to a woman. He was afraid of something else. The housekeeper had keys to every room in this house, including the ones he'd kept locked for 12 years. On Tuesday at 7 in the evening, Marin reached Rogers Park and saw the car. A black sedan was parked across the street, about 20 yards diagonally from the entrance to her apartment building, with dark tinted windows. And inside, as far as she could see, no one. She walked past, went upstairs, opened her apartment door and took off her shoes, then froze in the middle of the room because she suddenly remembered where she'd seen that car before, that morning in the back courtyard of the Arsini mansion, parked next to a row of old storage buildings, when she'd gone out to dump dirty water after washing the floors. Marin went to the window and looked down. The car was still there. She drew the curtains and told herself there were thousands of black sedans in this city, that she was just tired, that in the last 3 weeks she'd heard too much that a housekeeper wasn't supposed to know, and now she was starting to see danger everywhere. She went to bed. Wednesday morning. The car was gone, and she felt enormous relief, followed by a faint shame at having been so suspicious. Thursday at 6 in the evening she came home and found a white envelope lying on the floor right inside the door. No stamp, no address, no name. Someone had slid it under the door. Inside was only one thing, a photograph. The woman in the picture was Marin herself. She was standing on a stepladder in the second-floor corridor of the Arsini mansion, holding a rag in her right hand, leaning slightly toward the third window, her hair pinned low at the nape of her neck. She was in her work uniform and apron. The photo had been taken from the inner courtyard below, shooting upward through the very window she was washing. Marin looked at the image for a long time. She didn't understand why her hands had started shaking, until she realized. The person who took this photograph had been standing in the inner courtyard of the mansion. Not on the street, not outside the fence, right in the courtyard, less than 30 yards from where she stood in broad daylight, and none of the 12 men who waited at the study door every morning had noticed him. She turned the photograph over. On the back was one sentence written in black ink printed in firm block letters so the handwriting couldn't be identified. "He can't protect you." Marin didn't scream. She didn't drop the photograph. She just sank to the floor, leaned her back against the door, and sat there without moving for so long she couldn't later remember how long it was. It wasn't the message that frightened her. She'd read enough to know real threats are rarely written on paper. It was the photograph itself. For 2 years, the Arsini mansion had been the one place in the world where she felt nothing could happen to her. There were walls, gates, guards, 12 men, 4 phones, and 1 man who never slept. And someone had stood right in the courtyard, raised a camera, photographed her while she washed a window, and left as calmly as if they'd walked out of a park. She called Freddie. The older woman arrived 40 minutes later, still in her kitchen apron under her coat, and asked no questions. She took the photograph, turned it over, read the message, then placed it face down on the table. Then she did something Marin hadn't expected at all. She sat down on the floor beside her, leaned against the same door, and pulled her knees to her chest, just like a young girl, not a 63-year-old woman. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "I know you secretly go up to Nonna Rosalba," Freddie said. "For 6 months now, every Tuesday and Friday night when you finish your work, I know everything." Marin turned to her. "And I know you never took a cent from her and never told anyone, not even the master." Freddie let out a slow breath. "Oh, child, you know how to take care of everyone in this house, but who takes care of you?" Marin had no answer to that. Friday morning she came to the mansion earlier than usual and went straight to the study. Raphael was standing at his desk with an open folder. He looked up when she entered. She didn't say a word, just placed the ring of mansion keys on the desk between them. He looked at the keys, he understood immediately. And Marin saw the moment of recognition, something in his face darkened. "Who?" he asked. "I don't know, look." She placed the photograph beside the keys. Raphael looked at it for a long time. He didn't ask if she was scared. He didn't promise to find who did it. He didn't utter any of the words she'd prepared herself to argue against. He said only one thing: "You deserve to sleep without listening for an engine outside your window." Then he pushed the keys back toward her. When she didn't take them, he withdrew his hand. Marin left the room. She didn't look back, walked straight through the gates, and didn't cry until she was safely on the bus. 3 days later at 4 in the morning, Raphael's phone vibrated. An unknown number, 4 words. "I know who killed your father." The message included a photograph of something that could only belong to someone who had been there that night. On Saturday morning, a knock came at the door of the Rogers Park apartment, 3 slow, firm raps. Marin opened it, and in the corridor stood Nonna Rosalba, 82 years old, with a cane in one hand and a canvas bag in the other, back as straight as ever. At the end of the corridor by the stairs waited a servant who didn't take a single step closer. "Mrs. Arsini, how long are you going to keep me standing in the doorway?" Marin stepped back to let her in. The old woman entered, swept her gaze across the apartment, then walked straight to the only table, the dining table, and sat down. She leaned her cane against the table's edge. The first thing she said was not a comfort. "No one has changed my bandages for 3 weeks. I had to do it myself, terribly." Marin froze in the middle of the room, and then she began to cry the way a person cries who has held back too long. Without a sound, shoulders shaking, one hand pressed to her mouth. Nonna Rosalba didn't try to comfort her. She just sat and waited for it to pass. Marin washed her hands in the kitchen, took the canvas bag the old woman had brought out the low stool and knelt before her. She worked in silence for nearly a minute, movements practiced to automatic precision, careful, gentle. She didn't even ask if the old woman was in pain. You really did it yourself. I told you terribly. You should have called a nurse. I didn't want anyone in the house to see, the old woman said. Do you know why I didn't want that? Yes, you do. That's why for 6 months I've let you into my room and no one else. The old woman sat in silence for a while, looking down at the top of the kneeling woman's head. I was 20 when I stepped off the boat in New York. I didn't know a word of English except thank you. 6 months later I was married. Then why did you stay? That's a question you have to answer for yourself. I can't do it for you. The old woman straightened slightly. But I want to ask you something else, and you must answer honestly without pretense. Are you afraid? Yes. I don't blame you, but if something happened to that boy, would you drop everything and run to him? Yes, without hesitation, Marin answered. Without thinking. My job, the diploma you've been working toward for 7 years, even your own life. Yes, Nonna Rosalba nodded slowly. Then why do you think the love someone feels for you should be any less than what you feel? Marin's hand stopped. Do you think you're the only person in this world capable of loving that deeply? The old woman asked. Do you think my boy loves you only halfway, within reasonable limits, only when it's convenient? I don't think so. You don't think so? Everyone who runs away thinks so. For a while, silence filled the room. Marin sealed the last bandage and sat back, folding her hands on her knees. Mrs. Arsini, I know who he is now. I know you know. You don't have to tell me anything. What should I tell you? The old woman shrugged. My husband was the same, and his father. My son was shot in December 2018, less than a mile from the gates. I was the one who identified the body. Marin froze. For half a second she stopped moving, and the old woman noticed. What is it? My father died that same winter, Marin said. In January. Nonna Rosalba was silent for a long time, so long Marin thought she hadn't heard. I see, she finally said. Then she straightened and looked directly into Marin's face. That year took the instruments from both of your hands. It made my boy put down his stethoscope. It made you put down your books. And 8 years later, it brought the two of you together on one kitchen floor at 2 in the morning. Call it what you want. I'm too old to call it coincidence. Marin couldn't speak. The old woman reached for her cane, braced it against the floor and stood. I didn't come here to ask you to come back. Whether you return is your decision, and if you don't, I'll still care about you. But I want to say something before I leave. She stood, leaning on her cane, and when she spoke, her voice was very quiet. 6 months you hid this from the whole house to care for me. You finished your work before coming up. You never took a cent from me. You never asked for a word of thanks. Child, you know how to care for everyone in this world except yourself. When will you finally let yourself need someone? Marin walked her to the car. The old woman didn't speak of it again. She only reminded Marin to eat breakfast, then told the driver to go. Throughout the next Sunday, Marin couldn't do anything right. At 6 in the morning on Monday, her phone vibrated. It was Sabina, and her voice broke on the first word. He's gone. Those were the first 3 words Sabina said, and on the third her voice cracked. Where is he gone? Warehouse 7, 4 in the morning. Alone. Marin sat up on the edge of the bed. Sabina, slow down. He called me at 4, said he had to meet someone. I asked who, he didn't say. I asked who he was taking, he said no one. Then he gave me one instruction, and that's what scared me. Sabina stopped to catch her breath. He told me to wait exactly 2 hours before telling anyone, not a minute earlier. 2 hours were up at 6, it's now 6:04. Marin was already on her feet, searching for her shoes. Where are you? At home, and you? At the mansion. I called security. They're gathering everyone, but no one knows where to go because Warehouse 7 has 3 entrances and 4,000 square meters of floor space inside. I called the lawyer. He asked what evidence I had, and I said none. I don't know what else to do. Stay there, I'm coming. Marin reached the mansion at 6:40. In the hall stood more than a dozen men, the same ones who waited at the study every morning, and none of them moved because no one had told them what to do. Sabina stood in the middle of the hall with her phone in her hand. Freddie stood in the kitchen doorway. He's not answering, Sabina said. I've called 17 times. Marin didn't respond. She walked across the hall to the stairs leading to the basement. Where are you going? The accounting office. Open it for me. Why? Open it, Sabina. Someone found a key. The room was at the end of the basement corridor, behind the door Marin had passed every day for 2 years without ever stopping. Inside was a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a printer, and no windows. Marin stood in the middle of the room and looked. She looked with the eyes of someone who had cleaned this room 200 times and knew exactly where everything should be. 3 days before I left, she said, the trash can in this room was empty for 3 days straight. I told him about it, but he laughed. What does that mean? People stop throwing things away for two reasons: either they're doing nothing or they're taking everything home. She walked around the desk. Mr. Prosser worked in this room for 12 years. He printed a lot of paper. He wasn't a man who did nothing. Sabina followed her into the room. Marin stopped at the left corner of the desk and pointed to a rectangular mark in the thin layer of dust. There was a picture frame here, a family photo, his wife and two daughters taken somewhere by a lake. For 2 years it always stood in this same spot, angled toward his chair. I dusted it every Tuesday. Last Friday it was gone. She looked at Sabina. A man who removes a family photo from his desk is a man who doesn't plan to come back. Sabina said nothing. Marin moved to the filing cabinet and pulled open the second drawer on the left. It opened, it was empty. For 2 years this drawer was locked, she said. I cleaned this cabinet once a week. I knew which drawers were locked and which weren't. Silence filled the windowless room for about 5 seconds. Then Sabina understood. Marin saw the exact moment it happened because Sabina's face went white as chalk. He didn't go to a meeting, Sabina said. Someone called him there. Prosser started taking documents home 3 weeks ago. On Friday he removed the photo from his desk. This morning he left the drawer open because there was nothing left inside and he wasn't coming back for anything. Marin closed the drawer. He was preparing for this for at least 3 weeks. Sabina was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling the police. If you call the police, they'll arrive in an hour and ask you 30 questions before they even get out of the car. Marin headed for the door. Drive me there, now. Are you crazy? What are you going to do when you get there? I don't know, Marin answered, and she said it with absolute calm. But I'm the only person in this house who could read that room. And for the last 3 weeks he was teaching me to read payroll ledgers and contracts. Maybe it will help, maybe it won't, but I can't sit here. Sabina looked at her for a few seconds, then turned for her car keys. Freddie stood at the top of the stairs, and as the women passed she said only one thing: I'm coming with you. At 10 minutes to 8 the three of them drove through the gates. None of them knew that the man waiting at Warehouse 7 had brought something other than a gun as his main weapon. He had brought a folder of documents. Raphael Arsini arrived at Warehouse 7 on South Branch waterfront at 4:20 in the morning alone, and he knew this was a trap even before he got out of the car. He knew it the moment he read the message. Anyone who truly had important information wouldn't send a message at 4 in the morning, arrange a meeting at a warehouse owned by the Arsini family, and demand he come alone. But the photograph attached to those 4 words showed something no one could have faked. The photo showed a watch with a square face, a leather strap cracked near the 3rd hole, and initials with a year engraved on the back. It was his father's watch. It had disappeared from the scene that December night in 2018. For 8 years no one had found it. The police report had listed robbery as the motive. Raphael had never believed it, because a robber wouldn't take one specific item and leave the wallet behind. He pushed open the side door and stepped inside. The warehouse lights came on almost instantly, and in that sudden brightness 10 men were waiting for him. 9 stood in a wide arc, and the 10th was in the center, empty-handed, coat buttoned all the way up, hair combed as neatly as every Monday morning. "Good morning, sir," said Gideon Prosser. Raphael showed no surprise. He looked at the other 9 and recognized 4 of them. All 4 belonged to the family. 2 had served his father before Raphael was born. None of them met his eyes. "Where are the watches?" Raphael asked. Gideon reached into his coat pocket and laid them on a cargo crate in the center of the warehouse. The watch lay there with its square face and cracked strap. Raphael didn't step closer. He stayed where he was. "You showed them to me to lure me here," he said. "Now I'm here, speak." "You don't want to sit down? Speak." Gideon nodded slowly, as if respecting that. "I kept the books for this family for 12 years, he said. "Do you know how long 12 years is in a windowless room? For 12 years I knew exactly where every dollar came into this house and where it went, who stole from whom, which money was clean and which wasn't. And in those 12 years I was never allowed to sit at the table on the 2nd floor." "I'm asking you only one question," Raphael said. "Who killed my father?" Gideon Prosser looked at him. Then he answered with absolute calm in the same voice he always used to report on 3 matters every Monday morning. "I didn't pull the trigger. I never do that kind of thing, you know me. I just handled the timing. I told them which route the old man would take that evening, which car would be in front, which behind, and that he'd be home 40 minutes earlier than usual. That's all. 4 phone calls, less than 6 minutes total." Raphael didn't move. "Why?" "Because the old man was close to figuring it out." Gideon shrugged. "I came to this family 12 years ago in 2014. For 4 years I took a little, never more than 5,000 at a time, spreading the amounts across dozens of expense categories, and no one noticed. Then in the fall of 2018, the old man started asking questions. He didn't suspect me, he was just looking into a few workers' compensation payouts from the cold storage warehouses, but I knew he'd keep going because he was the type who always got to the bottom of things. Gideon paused. Your father was an honest man, that was his only problem. Raphael Arsini stood speechless. 8 years. 8 years he'd woken at 6 in the morning and opened the door to 12 men waiting. 8 years he never returned to the lecture hall, never touched the stethoscope in his desk drawer, and was never allowed to become who he wanted to be. 8 years he signed what he didn't want to sign, made decisions he didn't want to make, and he bore it all with only one thought keeping him going, that someday he would learn the name. And that name had been 2 floors below his study. Every Monday at 7:15, it knocked on his door and brought 2 cups of coffee. Every Monday morning, Raphael said, his voice hoarse, I brewed good coffee. You sat in a windowless room in my basement for 12 years, Gideon corrected him. Those are different things. Raphael raised his hand and his right thumb tapped rhythmically against his signet ring, 2 very quiet sounds in the empty warehouse. The 4 family men standing in the row heard them, and one of them stepped back half a step. What are you going to do to me? Gideon asked. Absolutely nothing, Gideon answered. I don't need you dead. Dead men don't sign documents, and I have something I need you to sign. He lifted a worn leather briefcase from behind the crate and set it beside the watch. Besides, I'm still waiting. Waiting for what? And at that moment the side door of the warehouse opened. Gideon Prosser smiled because the person who walked in was exactly the one he'd been waiting for from the start. Marin Doyle entered warehouse 7. Sabina walked on her left, Freddie Kowach on her right, and none of them held anything in their hands. Raphael turned and for a second lost his voice. Leave, now. No, Marin. I said no. She stopped in the middle of the warehouse about 5 paces from him and swept her gaze across the 9 men standing in a wide arc. She recognized 4 of them. Bertolli, who stood in the left corner at the study every morning and always asked for coffee without sugar. Cowell, who had twin daughters and had shown their photo to everyone in the kitchen last year. Mancuso and Red, men whose rooms in the guest wing she'd cleaned for 2 years, changed their towels, picked up their laundry, even knew what soap they used. All 4 looked at the floor. It's Doyle, Gideon Prosser said. His voice was as pleasant as ever. I've been waiting for you for quite some time. You were waiting for me from the beginning. He lifted the worn leather briefcase, opened it and placed 2 sheets of paper on the cargo crate, turned so she could read them. Please, you can read them aloud if you like. Marin stepped forward. The first page was a workers' compensation claim form, a printed form filled in by hand, the employee's name on the first line, Thomas Doyle. The location of the incident, Cold Storage Warehouse No. 4, South Branch Waterfront. Date, January 17, 2018. In the lower right corner was a stamp in red ink, the letters faded but still legible, Denneed. The second document was a 2-page internal report with a list of claims requiring review. At the bottom of the second page was a signature, Raphael Arsini. The date was 2 years ago. You came here to save a man who knew about this for 2 years, Gideon said. A man who paid you double what anyone else in this city would, so you'd never ask a single question. What did you think you were in that house, Miss Doyle? A lover or a line item in the budget? Marin didn't take her eyes off the page. Is he telling the truth? She asked without turning around. Yes, Raphael answered without a second's hesitation, and that was the only thing that saved him that night. I signed that report. 2 years ago I discovered irregularities in compensation payments from the cold storage warehouses and ordered every case reviewed. Then I handed the investigation to him. He paused. I trusted the correction to the very man who caused the problem and never checked again. 2 years you knew my father's name was on that list. Yes, since when? Since before you came to work in my house. Marin closed her eyes. I was going to tell you the night you left. You had 2 years to tell me. No one in the warehouse spoke. Gideon Prosser stood and let the silence stretch because this was what he'd been preparing for 3 weeks, and he knew everything was going as planned. Then Marin reached out and took the briefcase of documents. She didn't reread the first 2 pages. She turned to the third, then the fourth, then began flipping faster until she reached the last. And when she looked up, something in her face had changed. There's more than one claim here, she said. Gideon said nothing. 41 names, she said, spreading out the stack. From 2014 to last year, every one of them worked at the cold storage warehouses, every claim was Denneed, and every one passed across the same man's desk. She began to read slowly, clearly, one name at a time. When she reached the 9th name, one man in the arc raised his head. When she reached the 17th, a second. Marin stopped and stared directly at the man standing at the far left end of the row. Bertolli, your father. Warehouse number 4, 2016. How much did your family receive? Bertolli said nothing. Not $1, Marin said, just like mine. She continued reading. The 23rd name was Cowell, the 31st was Red. No one in the warehouse spoke, and no one needed to, because what was happening there no longer had anything to do with loyalty or betrayal. It was about 41 families who had been robbed in the very house whose doors they guarded. Bertolli lowered his weapon first, then Cowell. One by one the others followed, no one needing to give an order. Gideon Prosser turned and headed for the side door. He took 4 steps. Bertolli and Cowell blocked his path, one on each side. It took less than 5 seconds. He didn't shout, just stood with his hands behind his back, looking at Raphael Arsini with the expression of a man who had just lost a game he'd been sure he would win. Raphael moved toward him, one step then another, and his face wore an expression Marin had never seen on another person. She placed her hand on his shoulder. We both once learned to save people, she said. That winter took that from you and from me. Don't let it take the reason you chose that profession in the first place. Raphael stood still for a very long time, then stepped back. He turned to Bertolli and said in the voice of a man who had just set down an unbearably heavy burden, "Hand him over to the authorities, all 41 dossiers with him." By the time they walked out of Warehouse 7, dawn had broken. The watch with the square face still lay on the cargo crate, and Raphael went back to retrieve it himself. On the way home, Marin didn't sit beside him. She sat in the back seat by the right door while Raphael sat on the left, leaving exactly one empty seat between them that neither crossed. Sabina drove. Freddie sat in the front passenger seat and never turned around. 20 minutes. No one said a word. Then Marin spoke, her voice ordinary, no louder than the engine. "I didn't leave because you're a mafia boss." Raphael turned to her. "I could have lived with that," she said. "I thought about it. For 3 weeks I thought about it, came back and sat in your study every morning learning to read payroll ledgers. I could have stayed, knowing who you are." She stared straight ahead. "But you let me serve in a house that kept my father's file in a drawer. Give me time." She said only those words and nothing more. "Not today." The car stopped at the corner in Rogers Park. She opened the door, stepped out and didn't look back. For the next 3 weeks, Raphael Arsini sent her no messages. He didn't call. He didn't ask Sabina to speak to her, didn't ask Freddie to pass a word, didn't send anyone to watch her house. In those 3 weeks he did 3 things. First, he opened the old document safe in the room at the end of the basement corridor. It was the safe his grandfather had installed in 1972, and for 3 generations of Arsinis, no family head had ever opened it for another person to look inside. He sat alone in that windowless room for 8 days straight, over 10 hours each day. Second, he made a list, 41 names, each with an address, the amount of money owed, and the number of years since each claim had been marked denied. 12 families had moved to other states. 3 families had no one left. The third thing was the hardest. On Thursday evening, Raphael Arsini knocked on the door of the Rogers Park apartment. Marin opened it and said nothing. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood in the doorway, placed a stack of papers on the dining table pushed against the wall, the one she used as a desk, and stepped back. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I have no right to ask that and I know it. I'm asking you to let me fix it." Marin looked at the papers, 41 names, every claim reviewed from the beginning by proper standards with outside lawyers and independent auditors. "I didn't hide a single number." He paused. "In your name, not in mine." Marin looked up. "Why in my name? Because from me it would be charity from the Arsini family. From you it's 41 families getting back what belongs to them." He looked at her. "And because your father is first on the list." Marin opened the stack. On the first page the first line was Thomas Doyle. Beside it was a number and after that the date, January 17, 2018. She looked at it for a long time, then closed the papers and placed her hand on them. "I accept." Raphael let out a breath, and for the first time in 3 weeks he could breathe fully. "But I have a 4th condition." "I'm listening." "You fulfilled the first 3 conditions. You kept the first because when I asked you answered. You kept the third because you really did teach me. You broke the second, the very day you promised to keep it. So I'm not setting a 2nd condition for you anymore. It's meaningless. People don't keep promises based on words alone. Then how do they keep them? By being with them." Marin looked directly at him. "I want to be in the room when you work. Every room, not just the chair in the corner of the study where I learned to read ledgers, but all of them. Even the ones where you don't want me there, even the meetings where you'll find 10 perfectly reasonable reasons to tell me to stay home. Raf El Arsini didn't answer immediately. He stood there, and Marin could see him considering it, and she could see that he wanted to say no. You understand what you're asking. I understand. You'll see things you won't be able to forget. I already have, she said. That morning at Warehouse 7, I saw your face when you walked toward him, and I'm still standing here. Raphael looked at her a moment longer. All right, he said. 3 days later, she understood why he'd hesitated. Because the first room he had to take her to was a closed restaurant in Bridgeport. The restaurant had a sign on the door saying it was closed for the day, and inside, in the middle of the dining room, stood only one long table. Before entering, Raphael showed Marin where to sit, the chair on his left, and gave her 3 clear instructions. Don't stand up, don't pour anyone water, and if anyone asks a question, don't answer until he answers first. She sat in the indicated place and placed both hands on the table. The Halloran family arrived at 1 o'clock. Cormac Halloran was 61 with short silver hair. He entered first, followed by 3 men. They sat on the opposite side of the table, and Marin watched the transformation take place. It started before the door even opened, the moment the sound of a car came from the courtyard. Raphael's voice dropped 2 registers and stayed there. His eyes darkened, they didn't close, but they seemed to go out like a room where the electricity had been cut. All that remained behind that gaze was cold calculation. He sat differently. He held his hands differently. He didn't make a single motion without reason. The man who sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning telling her to read, while he sat beside her, was no longer in the room. Arsini Halloran, I heard you're doing a clean-up, internal matter. There are no internal matters in this business. You know that you lost your chief accountant and the whole city's been buzzing. Halloran lifted his wine glass and let his gaze slide slowly over Marin from head to toe before turning back. You brought a servant to a business table, Arsini. Raphael didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam the table, didn't stand, didn't change his posture. He just set down his glass very quietly and spoke in the same voice that had dropped 2 registers at the start. What did you just call my fiancé? No one at the table moved. The 3 men beside Halloran didn't stir. Arsini's 2 men at the door didn't move either. Nothing happened. And precisely because nothing happened, Marin understood what was actually happening. The whole table was waiting for Cormac Halloran's next words. Halloran took a sip of wine, then set the glass down. I didn't know, he said. Congratulations. Thank you. Can we now discuss the 9th dock? 40 minutes of discussion followed about the 9th dock. Permits, 2 roads, 3 contractors. Marin listened in silence from beginning to end. She understood about half of it. The part she understood came from those 3 weeks spent sitting in the chair in the corner of Raphael's study. At 1:45 they stood. Halloran shook Raphael's hand, nodded to Marin and left. Sabina drove them home, and this time Marin sat beside Raphael. He won't stop at the 9th dock, she said. No, he'll demand more in 6 months. Marin looked out the car window for a while. Then she asked the question she'd been meaning to ask since they left the restaurant. What will you do if he pushes it all the way? Raphael didn't answer immediately. Tell me the truth, she said. You promised me the first condition. When I ask, you answer honestly. I'll do what I used to do, he said, staring straight ahead. I'm not proud of it. I won't tell you what happened or when, but I won't lie to you any more about who I am. Marin sat in silence for a long time. She wasn't shocked. That was what frightened her, that she heard these words and wasn't horrified. Do you hate it? Yes. How much? Enough that I haven't slept a full night in 8 years, Raphael said. Enough that I keep the stethoscope in my desk drawer and can't bring myself to throw it away, but I can't open the drawer either. The car drove on for a while. Then Marin spoke words she would always remember, with a calm far greater than she'd expected from herself. Then we'll change this business. Raphael turned to look at her. Not because I'm afraid, she said. I stopped being afraid that day at Warehouse 7. It's something else. What? Because I don't want our child to grow up having to ask his father the same question I just asked you in this car. Raphael Arsini couldn't answer. He was silent the rest of the way. When the car pulled up to the gates, he still hadn't spoken. Sabina looked at the 2 of them in the rearview mirror and said nothing either. At Sunday, the whole family gathered at the dinner table, and in the middle of the second course, Nonna Rosalba set down her fork and never picked it up again. 19 people sat at the Arsini family Sunday table. Marin sat on Raphael's left, and for the first 40 minutes, no one asked her anything beyond a few polite questions. In the middle of the second course, a distant uncle across the table set down his fork and spoke louder than necessary. Miss Doyle, may I ask you something? Yes, sir. What did you do before you came to this house? The table grew a little quieter. Raphael started to answer, but Marin placed her hand on his wrist under the table and he fell silent. Before I came here, I cleaned rooms at the Nagya Street Hotel for 3 years, she said. Before that, I washed dishes at a restaurant in Pilsen on the night shift for 2 years. And before that, I was a second-year medical student. So you dropped out? Yes. Why? Because there was a 5-year-old boy who needed someone to sign papers, and there was no one else to sign them. She said it in an ordinary voice without lowering it or emphasizing any word, and she added no apology for any of the 3 jobs she'd just named. The uncle picked up his fork and asked no more questions. At that moment at the head of the table, Nonna Rosalba stopped speaking mid-sentence. She'd been saying something to the man on her right in Italian and simply stopped. Her right hand, resting on the napkin, began to tremble, her forehead beaded with sweat. She turned to Sabina and called her by a different name, the name of a woman not in the room. The aunt sitting beside her laughed lightly. Nonna is just tired, let her go upstairs and rest. 2 people stood and moved around the table to help her. Marin rose before either of them reached her. Don't help her up. Everyone at the table turned to look at her. She had already passed 3 chairs and was beside the old woman, kneeling so her face was level with Nonna Rosalba's. Mrs. Arsini, can you look at me? The old woman looked in her direction, but her gaze couldn't focus on anything. What time did you eat breakfast this morning? No answer. Marin took her wrist, pressed 2 fingers to her pulse and counted silently for 15 seconds. Then she looked up and spoke in a voice no one in this house had heard in the years she'd lived there. There's orange juice in the refrigerator, a bottle in the door middle shelf. Someone bring it immediately. Don't dilute it. One of the daughters-in-law ran to the kitchen. Sabina, call an ambulance. Tell them it's an 82-year-old woman with diabetes, confusion and signs of hypoglycemia. Sabina already had her phone out. And don't give her anything else. No wine, no coffee, no medicine. Don't let anyone help her stand. The uncle who had questioned Marin earlier started to say something. Marin didn't turn around. Please sit down. He sat, the bottle of juice arrived. Marin helped the old woman drink, the only person who knew was her. She came to me twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays when she finished her work. She never took a cent and never said a word, not even to my grandson. She turned to Raphael. You asked if I accepted her. Then she looked around the table. Look around, look at everyone sitting here. In a house full of armed men, your grandmother's life was saved by the woman who washed your floors. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. The paramedics examined her, took her blood pressure, and said she would be fine, that she was very lucky someone had reacted so quickly. Nonna Rosalba flatly refused to go to the hospital. And they eventually allowed her to stay home, on the condition that a nurse would visit starting the next day. When it was all over, Raphael led Marin to the kitchen. At this hour only the 2 of them were in the kitchen with only one light on above the sink. The old woman removed a ring from her left hand, gold, simple, worn smooth on the inside. It took effort to get it off. He stood and watched Marin laugh, and understood that his grandmother had destroyed everything down to its foundations. Then he sank onto the cold brick floor of the porch. No one could later remember exactly what he'd said, only that it had come out very badly. Inside, behind the glass doors, 19 people applauded, and Sabina Arsini shouted that she'd won the bet, and everyone else now owed her money. 11 days later, 2 people knocked on the study door, and what they placed on the desk was not an offer. It was a document with Marin's name in the director's line. The woman who entered introduced herself as Special Agent Naomi Fielder. She worked financial crimes, and the man accompanying her didn't speak a word for the next 40 minutes. Fielder was about 40 with her hair neatly pulled back, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She laid the document on the desk. Read it. It was a business registration form. The company was called Lakeshore Meridian Holdings. It had been incorporated last April. On the line for the legal representative under the position of director was Marin Doyle's name, along with her social security number and Rogers Park apartment address. Marin looked at the company name and remembered immediately. A Friday afternoon, the chair in the corner of the study, the list of 19 subsidiaries spread across 2 sheets of paper, her pencil stopped on the 14th line. The column beside it had been blank. No one had known who was in charge. I'll ask Gideon. I've never seen this document before, she said. I know. I never signed anything. I know that too, Fielder answered. The signature isn't yours, we've compared them. Gideon Prosser took your information from the Arsini family's personnel files and created this company 2 months ago. Over 15 months, $3,800,000 passed through its accounts. She sat down. The problem is, according to federal records, you're the director of a money laundering operation. Marin said nothing. You can prove you didn't know, Fielder continued. We believe you didn't, but proving it in court will take 2 years and cost more than you make in 10. During those 2 years, you'll be prohibited from leaving the state. You won't be able to work in healthcare in any capacity, and your name will appear in public records. She slid a second document across the desk. That's why I'm here with an offer: full immunity on all charges, the case closed forever, a new identity in another city. And in the very last line was something Marin had to read twice before she could believe it. With the new identity, her educational records would be fully restored: diploma, professional license, every last paper. Do you understand what that means? Fielder said. It means next Monday you'll wake up in another city and you'll already be a nurse, not almost but fully. Marin said nothing. I read your file, Fielder said, and her voice softened slightly, which somehow made it worse. 7 years you earned back every credit step by step at community college, evenings, weekends, paying out of pocket. 7 years you studied at someone else's kitchen table at 2 in the morning. You only have 1 clinical practice left, but you can't get the hours. Is that correct? Yes, I can wipe out those 7 years, you just need to sign once. Marin sat still for a long time. She thought about the 12-year-old boy who loved chess and always criticized her hair. She thought about how in another city he'd have a different name and would ask why. She remembered 7 years at kitchen tables. She picked up the pen, held it for about 10 seconds, then set it down. I won't sign this, she said, but I have something you need much more. Fielder looked up. 41 worker compensation claims, buried in the archives from 2014 to last year. Every one of them connected to cold storage warehouses on the South Branch. There's the signature of whoever approved every denial, corresponding bookkeeping entries, and the names of 41 working families and the amounts they were owed. She looked directly into the woman's eyes. You need a clean financial case with real victims, real numbers, and living people who can testify in court, not a stack of bank statements. Here it is. My father is first on that list. Are you protecting him? No, Marin answered. I'm reclaiming what belonged to my father. It just turned out to be in a place you weren't looking. Fielder was silent, studying her. Where are those 41 cases? In an old safe at the Arsini mansion, and you think he'll open that safe for me? The second meeting took place 3 days later at the mansion. Sabina Arsini began arguing fiercely from the first word. No, Sabina, no. Do you know what that safe is? Grandfather installed it in this house in 1972. 3 generations of our family have died over what's in that safe. If you open it for the feds, you're not just giving them 41 cases, you're giving them 30 years. I know. Then you've lost your mind. Raphael Arsini sat at the head of the table. He fell silent, reflexively tapping his signet ring twice, then took it off. Then he did something Marin had never seen before. He laid the ring on the table. My father kept those records, he said. My father died because of those records. I won't keep them anymore. Silence filled the room. Naomi Fielder gathered her documents into her folder. She stood, headed for the door, but stopped and turned to Marin. That man is worth it. No, Marin answered. I decide what I'm worth, and I'm not that cheap. That night, Raphael found her in the kitchen, where she sat with her textbooks open as she did every evening. He said only one thing: yes, I can't wait any longer. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in early autumn, and the person in charge was the 82-year-old woman sitting in an armchair in the middle of the foyer with a personal nurse behind her. Nonna Rosalba gave orders in 3 languages: Italian to the family, English to the catering service, and a third incomprehensible language that everyone who heard it immediately understood meant they needed to do exactly what she wanted. She made them rearrange the flowers 3 times and made them replace the tablecloths twice. By the second day, her nurse had stopped advising her to lie down. In the kitchen, Freddie Cowatch tasted the first course, set down her spoon and stood facing the wall for a while. When asked what was wrong, she answered that it was the onions. Mika was 13. He'd been out of the hospital for 4 months and now lived with his sister in their new apartment. That morning he brought out the chessboard and insisted Raphael play 1 game with him before the ceremony. Raphael agreed, thinking it would take 10 minutes. The game lasted 22 minutes, and Raphael Arsini lost cleanly. You brought your queen out too early, Mika said, putting away the pieces with the air of someone who'd completed important business. You and your sister are exactly alike, both impatient. Then it was Mika who took his sister's hand and led her to the altar. He was wearing his first suit and was so nervous he walked far ahead of the music. and Marin had to slow him down halfway, making the whole church laugh. Marin's vows were very short. I spent 7 years helping someone survive. I don't know how to promise anything more than that, so that's what I promise you. Raphael's vows were even shorter. I passed the kitchen for 107 nights, not daring to enter. From today, I won't walk past anymore. At the reception, Nonna Rosalba raised her glass, and the hall fell silent because she'd raised her hand. To cold hands, she said. She came to this house to wash floors, and she erased shadows that 3 generations of Arsenis were afraid to face. A year later, Warehouse 7 on the South Branch had become a food distribution center serving 4 city hospitals and 2 food banks in South Chicago. Arseni Freight now did only one thing: warehouse leasing and freight transport. 29 of the 41 families had received compensation. Thomas Doyle's name was first on that list. Gideon Prosser was convicted of financial fraud and aiding and abetting, the sentence far harsher than anything Raphael Arseni could have done to him with his own hands in that warehouse. Marin Doyle completed her final clinical practice and passed her qualifying exam at 29, after 7 years of waiting. She started working the night shift at a free clinic, located next to Warehouse 7. One spring night at 2 in the morning, the kitchen light was on. Marin sat at the table in her work clothes, a patient chart in front of her. She looked up and saw Raphael in the doorway. He entered, pulled out the chair opposite her and set the old stethoscope on the table, the one that had sat in a drawer for 8 years. "I can't use it anymore, it should be yours." Marin took it. Then she asked him the question she'd asked from that very first night in that small kitchen, the question he'd never answered. "Why 107? Which night was the first?" Raphael was silent for a moment. "The night I came home at 2 in the morning," he said. "I went up the back stairs because I didn't want anyone to know I was back. I stood in the dark at the bottom of the stairs and saw you. What was I doing? You were carrying a tray to the 3rd floor. It had medicine, bandages, and a glass of water. You were walking very quietly, afraid to wake anyone. You walked the whole corridor to the end and knocked 3 times on the last door." He looked at her. "No one had asked you to do that, no one was paying you, no one in the house knew about it, not even me until that night." Marin said nothing. "I stood there and realized something," Raphael said. "In this house there were 12 armed men. There were lawyers, accountants, my grandmother, whose name made this whole city lower its voice. And the only person who kept doing something good when no one was watching was you." He placed his hand on the table. "That was night number 1. From that night I started counting, and the night I knocked on your door was night number 107. Then what night is tonight?" "Night number 108, he said. "Still night number 108, because from that night on I never walked past you again." There are things people think no one sees. A tray of medicine carried to the 3rd floor in the middle of the night. A bandage changed for someone who doesn't want anyone to know about their weakness. A kitchen table lit for 7 years while a woman bends over a stack of textbooks, and no one asks why. A person's dignity is not in the work they do, but in how they treat others when absolutely no one can witness it. And the most remarkable thing is that someone still sees, just much later than we think. Delayed dreams too, they don't die. They just wait until we gather the courage to let ourselves return to them. And what Nonna Rosalba said was the truest truth of all: between caring for the whole world and letting someone care for us lies a vast distance. A person truly grows up only on the day they learn to open the second door.